When Ava James, a successful black businesswoman, stepped into the first-class boarding line, she never expected to be humiliated in front of a crowd. A gate agent, Karen Richardson, refused to let her through without even checking her ticket. But what started as an act of discrimination quickly spiraled into something much bigger. Because what Karen didn't know was that Ava's husband, James Jameson, wasn't just any man, he was the CEO of the airline. And when he arrived, the tables turned fast. Before we begin, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. The airport buzzed with the sounds of rolling suitcases, last-minute boarding calls, and impatient travelers shifting from foot to foot. The priority boarding line was a stark contrast, quiet, orderly, filled with passengers who had paid top dollar for luxury seating. Ava James adjusted her designer blazer, gripping the first-class ticket in her perfectly manicured hand. She was no stranger to flying in style, nor was she unfamiliar with the silent stares that often followed her, stares that questioned her presence among the elite. Today was no different. Standing at the boarding gate, a woman with a rigid posture and a name tag that read Karen locked eyes with Ava. A thin smirk curled on her lips before she spoke, her voice cutting through the ambient noise. "Hate to break it to you, but economy boarding is over there." Ava raised a brow. "Excuse me?" Karen's arms folded across her chest. "I said if you're looking for economy, it's on the other side." Ava remained calm. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." She held up her ticket, letting the bold print of first class do the talking. Karen barely glanced at it before waving her hand dismissively. "Nice try. I've never seen someone like you in this line before." The murmur of other passengers around them grew louder. Some were whispering, others blatantly staring. Ava could feel the judgment in their eyes, half waiting for her to step aside, half curious to see what she would do. Then, in a move that sent a shockwave through the crowd, Karen reached for her radio. "Security, I have a woman here trying to sneak into the first-class line without proper credentials." Ava inhaled sharply. Did she really just do that? Before the situation could escalate further, Ava pulled out her phone and dialed. "Hey, love, can you come here? There's someone who needs to speak with you." Karen let out a dry laugh. "Calling for backup? What's he going to do?" Ava didn't answer. She didn't need to, because a moment later, the entire room went silent as a tall, commanding man in a tailored suit stepped through the VIP lounge doors. James, and the CEO of the entire airline. Karen's smirk vanished in an instant. James' cold gaze locked onto her. "Who just disrespected my wife?" The air grew heavy. The tables had turned, and Karen had just made the biggest mistake of her career. Karen's face drained of color. The moment James Jameson, CEO of Orion Airlines, stepped forward, the murmur of the crowd vanished. Passengers watched wide-eyed as the man in the tailored navy blue suit approached his wife. His presence was commanding, his expression unreadable. Karen, who had been full of confidence just seconds ago, suddenly shrank. "Mr. Jameson," she stammered, her fingers tightening around the boarding pass scanner. Ava remained perfectly still, her gaze unwavering as she looked at the woman who had just humiliated her. The only sound was the overhead announcement echoing through the terminal. "Final boarding call for Flight 328. First-class passengers may proceed to Gate 12. James turned to his wife first, gently touching her arm. "Are you all right?" His voice was calm, but anyone listening could hear the storm beneath it. Ava gave a soft nod. "I'm fine." Then, her gaze flipped back to Karen. "But I think she owes me an explanation." Karen sputtered, her professional mask crumbling. "It was just a misunderstanding. I was following protocol." James's sharp eyes locked onto her. "Protocol?" Karen nodded frantically, trying to salvage what little control she had left. "Yes, sir. I was just ensuring proper verification for the first-class boarding process." A slow, dangerous smile crept onto James's face. "Is that so?" He turned to a nearby employee, one of the airline's supervisors, who had been watching from the check-in counter. Did you see this interaction? The supervisor hesitated before nodding. Yes, sir. I saw everything. James took a step forward, lowering his voice. Tell me, did she verify my wife's ticket before calling security? The supervisor swallowed hard. No, sir. She didn't. The silence that followed was thick. Karen's fingers twitched, and her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Ava crossed her arms. So let me get this straight, you assumed I didn't belong here, without even checking my ticket? Karen's lip trembled. James didn't wait for an answer. He turned to the crowd people who had been silently judging Ava just minutes ago. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to apologize for this disruption. It appears that my wife was discriminated against before even being given the courtesy of a ticket check. Murmurs spread through the passengers. A few people shifted uncomfortably, realizing they had made assumptions too. Karen took a shaky breath, desperation creeping in. Mr. Jameson, please, I didn't mean but... James held up a hand, stopping her. Security footage will tell me everything I need to know. That was when a security officer stepped forward, holding a tablet. Sir, we've pulled the footage from the boarding gate. He tapped the screen, and suddenly, Karen's actions were right there for everyone to see. The video left no room for debate. It clearly showed Karen dismissing Ava without checking the ticket, waving her off with a smirk of superiority. Karen gasped, as if seeing the undeniable evidence for the first time. I was just... James handed the tablet back to security and looked directly at Karen. You're on probation, aren't you? Karen's eyes widened in horror. Ava's eyebrow lifted. Interesting. So not only did you act with blatant bias, but you also did it while under supervision. Karen looked at the floor, but James wasn't finished. If my wife weren't who she is, if she weren't married to me, what would have happened just now? His voice was steady, but the weight of his words sent chills through the room. Karen had no answer. The supervisor cleared his throat, stepping closer. Mr. Jameson, I can assure you this is not how we train our staff. James's expression didn't change. Clearly, you need to do a better job. Ava exhaled softly, tilting her head. Tell me, Karen, do you believe I deserve to fly first class now? Karen looked trapped, her breathing shallow. James finally took out his phone, tapping the screen. I'm making a call, but before I do, I want you to hear something. He turned back to Karen. You assumed my wife didn't belong here. Now let's see if you still belong here. And just like that, Karen's entire world began to unravel. Karen stood frozen, her breath coming in short, panic bursts. The weight of James's words settled heavily on her shoulders, the eyes of passengers and employees drilling into her. James tapped his phone screen, pressing it to his ear. The silence was deafening. Yes, it's me, he said smoothly, his voice sharp as a blade. We have a personnel issue at Gate 12. I need an immediate decision on disciplinary action. Karen's knees nearly buckled. The supervisor, standing to the side, shifted uncomfortably. Sir, perhaps we can handle this internally. James held up a hand. No, this isn't just an internal matter. This is a systemic issue, and I will not allow it to persist within my airline. Ava remained silent, arms crossed, watching Karen squirm. Karen suddenly found her voice. Please, Mr. Jameson, I didn't mean any harm. It was just a mistake. Ava let out a small, humorless laugh. A mistake? Her voice was soft, but carried the weight of everything Karen had done. The mistake wasn't what you said. The mistake was that you assumed you wouldn't get caught. James lowered the phone slightly, his eyes cold. Mistakes happen when you spill coffee. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. Karen's lip quivered. I swear I don't discriminate. James exhaled through his nose. Really? Then why didn't you stop the 2 white passengers who stepped into this line just before my wife? Karen's mouth snapped shut. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Two men, one in a gray business suit, the other in a polo and jeans, shifted uncomfortably. The man in the suit cleared his throat. For the record, she didn't check my ticket either. Karen turned pale. Ava raised an eyebrow. Interesting. So it wasn't about protocol, was it? Karen's silence was her confession. James lifted his phone back to his ear. Effective immediately. Suspend her access. I want her badge turned in before this flight takes off. Karen gasped. No. Please. James held up a hand. Save it. My wife deserves better than this. And so do my customers. A security officer approached. Ms. Karen, I'll need your employee badge and airport clearance pass. Karen's hands trembled as she unpinned her badge. She looked at James, then at Ava. I'm really sorry. Ava's expression remained unreadable. Maybe next time you'll think before assuming someone doesn't belong. The officer took Karen's badge, and just like that, her authority was gone. James turned to the supervisor. Make sure she's escorted out professionally. No unnecessary embarrassment. We don't need another scandal. The supervisor nodded quickly. Understood, sir. Karen let out a shaky breath before security led her away. The crowd remained tense, the air thick with the weight of what had just happened. Then, a slow clap echoed through the terminal. A man in the priority line, a tall, older gentleman with silver hair, stepped forward, clapping deliberately. About time someone handled discrimination the right way. More passengers joined in, the applause growing louder. Some nodded at Ava in silent respect. Others gave James approving looks. But Ava wasn't interested in applause. She turned to her husband. Thank you. James softened. Always. The gate agent on standby quickly stepped forward. Mrs. James, we're ready to board you now. Please right this way. Ava and James moved toward the jet bridge, but then a flight attendant rushed toward them. Sir, wait. We have an offer for Mrs. James. Ava tilted her head. An offer? The attendant smiled. Our VIP cabin is currently unoccupied. We'd like to upgrade you for free. James chuckled. You hear that, love? Guess they finally recognize who you are. Ava smirked, stepping onto the plane. I always knew who I was. They're just catching up. And just like that, the woman who had been denied entry into the first-class line took her seat in the most exclusive cabin on the plane. As for Karen, the world would soon know her story whether she liked it or not. As Ava sank into the plush VIP seat, a flight attendant gently placed a glass of champagne on her tray table. Anything else we can get you, Mrs. James? The attendant asked, her tone filled with newfound respect. Ava took a sip, letting the cool bubbles tickle her throat. No, thank you. This is perfect. James, seated beside her, exhaled and adjusted his cufflinks. That was handled well, he murmured. Ava arched an eyebrow. Was it? James met her gaze, reading between the lines. Ava wasn't just thinking about Karen, she was thinking about every moment in her life where someone had looked at her and decided, you don't belong. I know this wasn't just about today, James said softly. Ava smiled, but there was a sharp edge to it. No, it wasn't. But today I won. But what neither of them knew was that this battle was far from over. Somewhere in the airport, a passenger named Rachel Brooks, a social media influencer with over 2 million followers, sat in the terminal, staring at her phone in shock. She had recorded the entire incident from the moment Karen dismissed Ava to the second James had her escorted out. Rachel didn't even hesitate. She hit upload. Caption: a black woman was denied her first-class seat today until her billionaire husband showed up. Watch what happens next. Within minutes, notifications exploded across her screen. 50K views, 200K views, 1 million views. And then Karen gets fired started trending worldwide. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, Ava and James were blissfully unaware that their private confrontation had become a global conversation. People flooded the comments. This is why we need cameras everywhere. Imagine if she wasn't married to a CEO. Karen thought she had power, but she picked the wrong woman to mess with. Justice served, but how many other Karens out there get away with this? Ava's name became synonymous with resilience. People started digging into her background, discovering she was not just a CEO's wife, but a powerhouse entrepreneur in her own right. And Karen? Her name was being dragged through the mud. Back on the ground, Karen sat in her car, staring at her phone in horror. Her inbox was flooded. HR had sent a termination notice. Her landlord was texting someone had leaked her address. Her friends were cutting ties, not wanting to be associated with the racist gate agent. Karen's hands shook. Her career was over. Her reputation? Destroyed. But then an idea hit her. She needed to flip the script. She opened Twitter and started typing. I was just doing my job. I never judged her for her race. This is cancel culture at its worst. She hit post, hoping to win sympathy. But she forgot one thing the internet never forgets. People started digging deeper. Someone found an old Facebook post of Karen complaining about certain people ruining first-class travel. A former coworker posted, "She treated me like garbage too." Not surprised at all. Even her past customers came forward with stories of mistreatment. Karen's attempt to save herself only made things worse. She had lost more than her job. She had lost everything. As the plane began its descent, a flight attendant handed Ava her phone. "Ma'am, I thought you should see this." Ava scrolled through the messages. Friends, colleagues, reporters. Then she saw the video. She watched herself stand her ground. She watched James step in. She watched Karen crumble. Then she saw the comments, the anger, the praise, the sheer magnitude of the moment. James glanced over. Something wrong? Ava set the phone down. No, but something big just happened. As the plane touched down, she knew one thing for certain: this wasn't over yet, because now the whole world was watching. The second Ava stepped off the plane, she felt it. The air was different. It wasn't just the usual post-flight fatigue, there was a tension, a weight pressing down on her shoulders. James felt it too. His phone vibrated nonstop in his pocket, emails and missed calls piling up like a storm brewing on the horizon. Ava's assistant, Melanie, was already waiting at the gate, looking frantic. "We have a problem," she whispered the moment Ava approached. Ava raised an eyebrow. "Just one?" Melanie handed over a tablet. "You need to see this." Ava's stomach tightened as she watched the video playing on the screen. There, on live television, sat Karen. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her voice shaking just enough to sound fragile, but Ava could see through the act. "I was just doing my job," Karen sniffled, clutching a tissue. "I never meant to offend anyone. I was following protocol, and suddenly my whole life was destroyed." The camera zoomed in on her trembling hands. "I've lost my job, my home, my friends. All because of a misunderstanding." The interviewer, an older man with sympathetic eyes, leaned forward. "And you're saying this wasn't about race?" Karen shook her head violently. "Absolutely not. I would have done the same thing to anyone." Ava's jaw clenched. The lies were piling up. Then came the worst part. Karen turned to the camera, her voice softening. "Ava, if you're watching this, please have mercy." Within minutes, the internet exploded. "I don't trust her. She's playing the victim." People lose their jobs every day for less. Actions have consequences. But isn't this too much? Should she lose everything over one mistake? Ava exhaled slowly, rubbing her temples. James was already on his phone. "We need to control the narrative. If we don't, she will." Ava nodded. "Then let's control it." Later that night, Ava posted something that no one saw coming. "Karen wants to tell her side of the story? Fine. Let's do it properly. Karen, meet me for an interview. Face to face." The internet lost its mind. Wait, what? Ava is going to sit down with her? This woman is too classy for us. Karen better not try anything stupid. Karen had no choice but to accept. If she refused, she'd look even worse. The next day, under the bright lights of a high-end news studio, Ava and Karen sat across from each other. The room buzzed with tension. Karen looked nervous, but there was a flicker of defiance in her eyes. Ava, on the other hand, was calm, collected, and completely in control. The interviewer wasted no time. "Karen, do you regret what happened?" Karen nodded quickly. "Of course. I never wanted any of this." Ava tilted her head. "Then let me ask you this: if my husband hadn't stepped in, if I were just another woman standing in that line, would you have apologized?" Karen hesitated. Too long. The silence spoke for itself. Ava let the silence linger before speaking again. "You didn't think you'd get caught. That's what this is about." Karen's eyes flickered with something: guilt, fear. Ava leaned forward. "You wanted to humiliate me, but instead, the world humiliated you." Karen's hands trembled, but Ava wasn't done. She turned to the camera. "This isn't just about Karen. This is about every person who has ever been dismissed, ignored, or disrespected because of what they look like." The audience was silent. Ava looked back at Karen. "You want my mercy? Here it is. Take this moment. Learn from it. Do better." Karen stared at her, stunned. The interview ended, and within minutes, Ava's words became a movement. The interview was over, but its impact was just beginning. As Ava walked off set, she could feel the weight of what had just happened. The studio was buzzing, cameras still rolling, producers whispering furiously into their earpieces. Karen remained in her seat, stunned into silence. James was waiting just beyond the studio doors, arms crossed. "That was a bold move," he murmured as Ava approached. Ava sighed. "I didn't do it for her. I did it because this conversation needed to happen." James studied her for a moment, then nodded. "And now, the real question is what happens next." Ava barely had time to process before her phone buzzed. A private number. She hesitated, then answered. "Ava James," a deep, authoritative voice said. "Speaking." "This is Robert Langston, CEO of LNN." Ava raised an eyebrow. "LNN? One of the biggest news networks in the country. I saw your interview, and I have a proposal." Ava exchanged a glance with James, intrigued. "I'm listening." Langston wasted no time. "You handled yourself with class, intelligence, and strength. People are talking about this interview not just as a viral moment, but as a cultural shift. We want you to join us." Ava blinked. "Join you?" "A talk show. Your own platform. A space where you can have real conversations about race, privilege, and justice. No fluff. No filters. Just truth." Ava wasn't easily caught off guard, but this was unexpected. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Langston, but I run a business." Langston chuckled. "I know. And that's why I'm offering full control. You call the shots. You set the terms." Ava tapped her fingers against her phone, considering. James, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. "This isn't just a job, Ava. This is influence." Afa met Hishkesh. She already had power. But this was something more. "Give me 24 hours, she told Langston. "Take your time," he replied smoothly. "But trust me, this is the kind of opportunity that changes the game." Meanwhile, Karen sat in the back of a dimly lit coffee shop, furiously scrolling through her phone. The interview had backfired. She thought playing the victim would help. But instead, Ava had turned the moment into a lesson, and now, Karen was being branded as the example of everything wrong with discrimination in the workplace. She clenched her fists. "She made me look weak." Across from her sat a man in a sleek gray suit. "You want to fix this?" he asked, voice low and calculated. Karen swallowed. "I want my life back." The man slid a folder across the table. "Then you need to take control of the narrative." Karen opened it, eyes widening. Inside was a dossier on Ava James, her past, her business, her family. Expose her, the man said. Make people question if she's really as perfect as they think. Karen hesitated. This was dangerous. But then she thought about the job she lost, the humiliation she endured, the power Ava now had. Her grip on the folder tightened. I'm in. That night, as Ava sat in her home office, her phone rang again. This time it was her assistant, Melanie. Ava, we have a problem. Ava sat up straighter. What is it? Melanie's voice was urgent. Karen's not done. She's digging into your past. And she has help. Ava's pulse quickened. Help from who? Melanie hesitated. I don't know yet. But whatever she's planning, it's big. Ava exhaled slowly. This wasn't over. Not even close. And the next move was hers. Ava sat at her desk, staring at her phone screen. Melanie's warning echoed in her mind. Karen's not done. She's digging into your past. And she has help. Ava had seen enough scandals to know how these things worked. When people couldn't win the argument, they changed the battlefield. They dug for dirt. They twisted narratives. She had expected Karen to fade into the background. But instead, Karen was preparing for one final blow. James entered the office, a glass of bourbon in hand. You're thinking too hard, he said, setting the drink down beside her. Ava exhaled. Karen's not going down quietly. James leaned against the desk, arms crossed. She can try whatever she wants. The truth is on your side. Afamet Hishkesh. You and I both know truth isn't always enough. James didn't argue. He knew it too. And he was right to be cautious, because at that exact moment, Karen was about to launch her next move. Karen sat in a sleek conference room, flanked by two men in expensive suits. The man on her left, Logan Pierce, was a media strategist known for rehabilitating public figures. The key, Logan said, sliding a folder toward Karen, is to control the conversation. Right now, you're the villain. We need to make people question if Ava is really the hero. Karen opened the folder and gasped. Where did you get this? Inside were photos of Ava at an exclusive charity gala 5 years ago, standing next to a controversial businessman who had later been exposed for corruption. Karen smirked. Oh, this is good. Logan nodded. We plant the idea. Is Ava James really who she claims to be? We don't need proof. We just need doubt. Karen's fingers tightened around the folder. She was going to flip the script. The next morning, Ava woke up to chaos. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Emails, missed calls, news alerts. She clicked on the top headline. Exclusive. Is Ava James as innocent as she claims? She scrolled down, and her stomach tightened. There was a photo of her from years ago, shaking hands with a disgraced billionaire. The article painted her as a hypocrite, suggesting that while she called for accountability, she had once rubbed shoulders with corrupt elites. Ava clenched her jaw. Unbelievable. James, who had been reading over her shoulder, cursed under his breath. This is manufactured nonsense. Ava exhaled sharply. It doesn't matter. It's out there now. The internet erupted. I supported Ava, but now I don't know. Why was she hanging out with corrupt billionaires? Typical. Calls out discrimination, but look who she was friends with. This feels like a setup, but still, she should explain herself. Ava wasn't just fighting one woman anymore. She was fighting a machine. As Ava sat in her office, debating her next move, her phone rang. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. This is Ava. A deep voice responded. Mrs. James. You don't know me, but I know who's behind this attack. Ava sat up straight. Who is this? Someone who used to work for Logan Pierce. Someone who knows how far he's willing to go. Ava's pulse quickened. Meet me. I have proof that can shut this down. Ava glanced at James. She had a choice. Ignore the call and let the media destroy her. Or step into the unknown and take back control. She took a breath. Tell me where. And just like that, the game had changed again. Ava sat in the back of a sleek black SUV, fingers tapping against her knee as the city lights blurred past the tinted windows. James sat beside her, his expression unreadable, but she could feel the tension in his posture. "Are we really doing this?" he asked, voice low. Ava exhaled slowly. "We don't have a choice. If someone has proof that Karen and Logan set this up, I need to see it." James's jaw tightened. "And if it's a trap? Affirmative. Then at least we'll know who we're dealing with." The SUV pulled into an underground parking lot beneath an abandoned office building. Ava's security team, already stationed outside, gave them the all-clear. Ava and James stepped out. A single figure stood in the dimly lit garage, a man in a dark coat, hands tucked into his pockets. As Ava approached, he lifted his head, revealing piercing blue eyes and a face lined with experience. "Mrs. James," he said, his voice gravelly, "you're either very brave or very reckless." Ava crossed her arms. "Who are you?" The man glanced around before speaking. "My name is Daniel Cross. I used to work for Logan Pierce." James frowned. "And now?" Daniel smirked. "Now I don't like what I see. And I don't like being part of a machine that ruins people for sport." Ava tilted her head. "You have proof Karen's smear campaign was planned." Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out a USB drive. "Everything's on here. Emails, messages, even a contract Logan had Karen sign agreeing to strategic narrative reconstruction, which is a fancy way of saying smear campaign." Ava took the USB, her fingers tightening around it. "Why are you giving this to me?" Daniel hesitated, then sighed. "Because I know what it's like to be on the wrong side of this game. And because I know Logan. If you don't end this now, he'll keep coming." Ava and James didn't waste a second. Back in the SUV, they plugged the USB into a secured laptop. What they found made Ava's stomach turn. Emails from Logan to Karen, coaching her on how to spin her story. A full media strategy to discredit Ava, prepared weeks before Karen's interview. A memo outlining Logan's ultimate goal, forcing Ava to retreat from the public eye. James let out a low whistle. They didn't just want to embarrass you. They wanted to erase you. Ava's hands curled into fists. "Not today." Ava picked up her phone and dialed Melanie. "Leak it," she said. Melanie didn't hesitate. "Consider it done." Within minutes, screenshots of Logan's emails were circulating online. News outlets picked up the story. Journalists who had been skeptical of Ava suddenly switched sides. Breaking. Leaked emails expose smear campaign against Ava James. Logan Pierce and Karen orchestrated attack on Ava James caught in the act. Justice served. Ava James fights back and wins. Karen, who had been enjoying her brief return to sympathy, was suddenly under siege again. And this time, there was no escape. In her small apartment, Karen stared at her phone in horror. Her inbox was flooded. Her name was trending again, but this time, not as a victim. Karen lied. "This just keeps getting worse. We all defended her and she played us. Logan Pierce needs to be held accountable for this mess." Karen's hands shook. She grabbed her suitcase, shoving clothes inside. She needed to get away, disappear until this blew over. But before she could leave, a loud knock on the door. She froze. Then Karen Richardson opened up. "We need to talk." It wasn't the police. It was the media. And this time, there was nowhere left to hide. Karen stood frozen in her apartment, suitcase half-packed, heart pounding. The voices outside her door grew louder. Reporters. Cameras. The press had found her. "Karen Richardson, do you have a comment on the leaked emails? Were you working with Logan Pierce from the beginning? Do you regret trying to smear Ava James?" Karen's throat tightened. She had thought she could control the narrative. But now, she was losing everything again. She turned away from the door, grabbing her phone with trembling hands. There was only one person left who could help her now. She dialed. The line rang once. Twice. "Then what do you want?" Logan Pierce's voice was cold, irritated. "They're outside my apartment," Karen hissed. "I need help." A beat of silence. Then Logan sighed. "This is what happens when you get caught. You were sloppy." Karen gritted her teeth. "Sloppy? You're the one who told me this plan would work." Logan chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "And it did, for a while. But now you're a liability." Karen's stomach dropped. "Wait, what does that mean?" "It means," Logan said smoothly, "that if anyone asks, I had no idea what you were doing." Karen's blood ran cold. "You're throwing me under the bus." Logan sighed, sounding bored. "Gadden, Gadden, Gadden. You lost. Ava won. And I don't associate with losers." The line went dead. Karen let out a shaky breath, her vision blurring with panic. She was alone. Completely alone. And outside, the cameras kept rolling. Meanwhile, across the city, Logan Pierce was already working on his next move. He sat in his high-rise office, the skyline glowing behind him, fingers tapping rhythmically on his desk. The media storm was bad, but he wasn't done yet. He turned to his assistant. "Get me an interview. A big one. Prime time. I'm taking control of this narrative." His assistant hesitated. "But sir, the leaked emails, people believe what they're told," Logan interrupted. "And I'm about to tell them a different story." Within 2 hours, Logan was in a news studio, ready to spin his lies. The interviewer didn't hold back. "Mr. Pierce, leaked emails prove that you orchestrated a smear campaign against Ava James. Do you deny it?" Logan smiled, the kind of smile only a seasoned manipulator could pull off. "Absolutely. Those emails were taken out of context. In fact, I was only trying to mediate the situation between Karen and Ava. I had no idea Karen would go this far." The interviewer frowned. "But you advised her Karen was desperate," Logan interrupted smoothly. "She asked for help. I gave her guidance. But she acted on her own." As Logan spoke, millions watched, including Ava. She sat on her couch, watching the interview, expression unreadable. James stood beside her, shaking his head. "He's lying through his teeth." Ava leaned forward. "Let him dig his own grave." James raised an eyebrow. "You have something planned?" Ava smirked. "Of course." Because what Logan didn't know was that Ava had one last card to play, and she was about to use it. The next morning, the real bombshell dropped. Melanie had sent an anonymous tip to one of the biggest investigative journalists in the country. And now they had everything. Bank records showing Logan paid Karen to do the interview. Audio recordings of Logan coaching Karen on how to play the victim. Texts proving Logan had been planning Ava's downfall for months. By noon, every major news outlet was covering it. Logan Pierce exposed. Proof he orchestrated attack on Ava James. FBI investigating Logan Pierce for defamation fraud. Ava James responds. Justice always wins. Logan's entire empire collapsed overnight. His investors pulled out. His clients cut ties. And within 24 hours, he was removed as CEO of his firm. As for Ava, she received a personal call from Robert Langston, CEO of LNN, the same man who had offered her a talk show. "Ava, the people want to hear from you. Are you ready to step into the spotlight?" Ava smiled, feeling the weight of the past few weeks finally lift. "I was born ready." And just like that, Ava James went from being a target to becoming a legend. The world had watched Ava James fight back. They had seen her stand her ground, expose corruption, and bring down a powerful man who had tried to destroy her. But today? Today was different. Today? She wasn't playing defense anymore. She was stepping into her power. The LNN studio was buzzing with anticipation. Millions of people were tuned in. The audience seats were packed with leaders, activists, and everyday people who had followed her story. And at the center of it all, Ava James sat in the host's chair, ready to address the world. A camera light blinked red. The producer gave her a silent countdown. 3, 2, 1. Ava looked straight into the lens and began. The past few weeks have been a lesson. Her voice was calm, steady. I learned that power doesn't always come from money or connections. Sometimes real power comes from knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone take that away from you. The audience sat silent, hanging on every word. I wasn't supposed to win this fight. I was supposed to give up, to walk away. She leaned forward. But I didn't. And that's why we're here today. The room was electric. Ava paused, then smiled. But I'm not here to talk about the past. I'm here to talk about the future. She turned to the screen behind her. A new logo appeared, bold, powerful. The Ava James Foundation. The audience gasped, then erupted into applause. Ava continued. This foundation will fight against workplace discrimination. It will provide legal support to those who are silenced. And it will make sure no one else has to fight alone. The room shook with applause. As the applause settled, Ava's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen, and her breath caught. A notification from an anonymous donor. $10 million has been donated to the Ava James Foundation. The audience gasped as the number flashed across the screen. Even James, watching from backstage, raised an eyebrow. Ava laughed softly, shaking her head. Looks like we just got our first investor. The crowd erupted again. Back in a dimly lit motel, Karen Richardson sat alone, watching the broadcast from her tiny laptop. Her face was pale, her hands gripping the armrest of the chair. She had lost everything. But as she watched Ava command the stage, something shifted in her eyes. Regret, and then acceptance. She reached for her phone, opened Twitter, and started typing. Ava James, I was wrong about you. I see that now, and I hope one day I can make things right. She hesitated, then hit post. And, for the first time in weeks, she breathed. As the broadcast neared its end, Ava looked into the camera one last time. To everyone watching, this isn't just my fight. It's ours. We don't change the world by staying silent. We change it by standing up. So stand up. She smiled. And don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong. The crowd stood, roaring in applause. And with that, Ava James didn't just win the fight. She started a revolution. Ava James stood her ground, fought back against injustice, and came out stronger than ever. But this isn't just her story, it's a story for anyone who's ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told they don't belong. Now it's your turn to stand up. Where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. Let's see how far this movement has spread. And if you want more stories that expose the truth, deliver justice, and keep you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. The next story might just change everything. Subscribe now, and let's make history together.